The quiet man in the corner. It was a cold evening in New York City. The streets were wet from light rain. Yellow taxis moved slowly through traffic. Inside one of the city's most expensive restaurants, golden lights hung from the ceiling, and soft music played in the background. The waiters wore black suits and white gloves. Everything was perfect. Every table was filled with the city's richest and most powerful people. In a quiet corner near the large window, a man sat alone. He wore a simple black jacket, a plain gray shirt, and jeans. His hair was a little messy, and his beard had hints of gray. He did not belong to the crowd. No one recognized him at first glance. No one gave him a second look. But that man was Keanu Reeves. Keanu was not there to be noticed. He just wanted a peaceful dinner. He had been shooting for a film the whole week, and his body was tired. His heart was even more tired. He had recently lost a close friend. The loneliness was deep. The kind of loneliness that makes silence feel louder. He sat with his hands folded and looked out the window at the falling rain. He did not want fancy food. He wanted a place where he could feel human again. He ordered a simple bowl of soup and a small plate of salad. The waiter looked surprised but nodded politely. Across the restaurant, loud laughter broke through the calm music. A group of well-dressed people had arrived. They were the rich Holland family, known across the city for their business empire and their arrogant behavior. They were loud, demanding, and acted like they owned the place. At the center of the group was Gregory Holland, the oldest son. He wore a gold watch, spoke too loud, and laughed even louder. With him were his younger sister Alina and their parents. They all wore designer clothes, each piece worth more than what most people made in a month. The manager of the restaurant came out personally to greet them. They were treated like royalty. As the family sat down at the table near Keanu's, Gregory's eyes fell on the man in the corner. He frowned. "Who let someone like that sit here?" he whispered to Alina. "That guy looked like he walked in from the street." Alina giggled and whispered back, "Maybe he's a waiter on break." Gregory smirked. "Let's test." They raised his hand and called out loud, "Hey, you in the black jacket, come here." Keanu turned his head slowly. He looked confused but calm. He stood up and walked over to the table. Gregory smiled with fake kindness. "Can we get some fresh napkins and maybe refill the water? We're paying a lot to be here, you know." Keanu didn't answer right away. He looked at each face around the table. There was no kindness in their eyes, only mockery. "I'm not a waiter," he said softly. Gregory rolled his eyes. "Of course you're not," he said with a laugh. Then turned to his family. "This is what I mean about restaurants letting anyone in." Keanu stayed still, his hands by his side, his face unreadably. Waiter quickly rushed over to fix the misunderstanding. He apologized again and again. "Sir, I'm sorry, sir. Please enjoy your meal." Keanu nodded slightly and walked back to his table, but the damage was done. The whole section had gone quiet. People stared. Whispers floated through the air. Some guests now recognized him, some didn't, but the look in his eyes told a story deeper than fame or money. He sat down and looked at his soup. It had gone cold, but he didn't complain. He just sat there quiet. A young waitress named Emily, had been watching everything. Her hands were shaking. She had seen people treated badly before, but never someone like him. She walked over to his table with fresh soup and a warm smile. "Sir, I made this one myself. I hope it's better." Keanu looked up and gave a soft smile. "Thank you. That's very kind." Emily paused. Her voice was low. "I know who you are, and I'm so sorry for what happened." Keanu looked into her eyes and said softly, "You don't have to be sorry for other people's choices. Just be kind in your own life. That's enough." She nodded, trying not to cry, and left. Back at the Holland table, Gregory was still laughing to himself. "Did you see his face?" Classic. Alina giggled. "He looked like he was going to cry." Mother leaned in a little too loudly. "These kinds of people don't belong in places like this. They ruin the mood." Father chuckled. "Someone should remind him he's not in a movie right now." But not everyone found it funny. To tables away, an older couple had recognized Keanu and whispered to each other, "Isn't that the actor, the one who gives all his money to charities? And I read once that he took the subway and gave up his seat to a pregnant woman as the kind of man the world needs more of." The husband whispered. Keanu finished his meal quietly and paid in cash. He left a generous tip for Emily and wrote a note on the napkin. "Thank you for your kindness. It meant more than you know." Then he stood up and walked out into the rain without an umbrella. It didn't look back. But the story didn't end there. 12 days later, something unexpected happened. Emily received a letter at the restaurant. It had no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Emily, your kindness reminded me why I still believe in people. I'd like to offer you something. Please call this number if you're willing to talk." Attached was a card with a phone number and a small black envelope. containing $10,000 in cash. Emily's hand shook as she held it. She had never seen so much money in one placement. While the Holland family continued their usual life of dinners, events, and arrogance, they had no idea their shallow behavior would soon be exposed to the world because someone had filmed the moment. Gregory humiliated the quiet man in the black jacket, and that video was about to go viral. The video that shook the city. It was a bright morning in New York City, but inside the Holland mansion, the air was heavy with tension. Gregory sat at the long dining table, scrolling through his phone, his face pale, his mouth half open. The loud, confident man from the restaurant was gone, replaced by a boy who had just realized he had made a huge mistake. "Mom, Dad, you need to see this," he called out, his voice trembling. His parents walked in, annoyed. "What now?" his father asked. "What's with the drama?" So early in the day, Gregory held up his phone. "Someone recorded the dinner at La Grand. The video of me talking to that guy in the jacket. It's everywhere." His mother frowned. "What video?" Gregory tapped play. The video showed him calling Keanu over, mistaking him for a waiter, then laughing with Alina and mocking him. It ended with a close-up of Keanu's quiet face walking back to his seat. The sadness in his eyes was captured clearly. Caption read: "Billionaire mocks quiet man at luxury restaurant. Later finds out who he really is." His father's face turned red. "Shut it off." He snapped a bit. It was too late. The damage had already spread in social media. The video had crossed 5 million views overnight. It was on every platform. People were furious, not because they recognized Keanu Reeves at first, but because they saw how a man was humiliated for no reason and stayed calm through it. Only hours later did people start realizing who he really was. Comments flooded in. This is Keanu Reeves, the actor who gave up his seat on the subway for strangers, lost his daughter, his girlfriend, and still remained humble. He deserves respect. That rich guy Gregory should be ashamed. Within a day, Gregory's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. At her small apartment, Emily sat in shock, reading thousands of messages from strangers who had found her name after Keanu's note had leaked. Someone had posted a photo of the napkin. He wrote on with his "Thank you message." Emily, the waitress people began calling her. Messages came in from around the world, people thanking her for showing kindness when no one else did. Emily felt overwhelmed, but she also felt something deeper. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. That afternoon, she made the call to the number on the card. A calm voice answered. "Hello, this is Emily. I'm calling about the note you left here." Was a soft pause before the voice spoke again. "Emily, thank you for calling. This is Keanu." Her heart skipped a beat. She had spoken to many customers before, but this voice was different, gentle, sincere. "Steady, didn't expect you to call so soon," he said with a warm laugh. "He almost didn't," she replied. "I thought maybe it was fake or some kind of prank." "It's not. I meant every word in that note. I was hoping we could meet and talk properly." She agreed, and they decided to meet the next evening at a quiet bookstore cafe downtown. Meanwhile, at the Holland mansion, panic had taken over. The family's business was starting to feel the pressure. Sponsors had started pulling away from deals. News articles were asking questions about the values of the family's leadership, and Gregory's name was now attached to the word entitled in every search result. "We need to do damage control," his father shouted at the breakfast table. "We need a press release, an apology, maybe a donation or something." But his mother shook her head. "It won't work. They've already seen who we are." Alina, who had been silent the whole time, finally spoke. "Maybe we should actually apologize, not for cameras, not for the media, but for real." Her voice was soft, but honest for once. Gregory looked at her surprised. "You think saying sorry will fix this? You think trying to be better is the only choice we have now?" But their parents weren't ready to hear that. Across the city, Emily walked into the small bookstore cafe, a place that smelled like old paper and fresh coffee. And there he was, Keanu Reeves, sitting in a corner once again with a cup of tea and a notebook. Stood up when he saw her and gave a kind smile. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me," she said nervously. They sat and talked for hours, not about fame or money, but about life, about loneliness, about the strange kindness of strangers. Keanu told her about his childhood, how he moved from place to place, and how he always felt like he didn't belong anywhere. He told her about the people he had lost and how grief never really goes away. "You just learn to walk with it," he said quietly. Emily shared her story, to about growing up in a small town, moving to the city, chasing dreams that kept getting smaller every year. She told him how one simple "thank you" had changed everything for her. "You reminded me that small kindness still matters," she said, "and you reminded me that even when the world is cruel, there are still people who care," he replied. Before they left, Keanu handed her an envelope. "I want to help you chase your dreams," he said. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a note that read, "For the courage it takes to be kind when no one else is watching." Emily cried, not because of the money, But because someone believed in her the next day, Keanu quietly reached out to the restaurant manager and bought every unpaid dinner from that night, including those of people he had never met. He left a message for them. Each one received a handwritten note that said, "The world is hard enough, let's not add to its weight." With cruelty, word spread fast again, but this time the story was different. This time it was about how one man turned a moment of pain into something good at the same time. The Holland family received a letter at their mansion. It was addressed to Gregory, written on soft cream paper. "Dear Gregory, sometimes the loudest lessons come in silence. I hope you take this moment not with shame, but with change. We all have a choice. Choose kindness next time." There was no signature, but Gregory knew who it was from. Sat with the letter in his hand for a long time before quietly folding it and placing it in his desk drawer, not to hide it, but to keep it. That evening he went to his sister's room and said, "I think I want to do something different." "Something right?" Alina nodded. "Maybe it's time we stopped pretending and started becoming better." And so the story was not over. It had just begun, because one dinner, one insult, and one quiet man in a black jacket had started something that no one saw coming. Asterisk. The invitation that changed everything. These had passed since the video of the dinner had taken over the internet, but its effects were still spreading like quiet ripples across a still lake. Keanu Reeves had returned to his simple life, avoiding press interviews and refusing to comment on what had happened. He had never been a man who chased attention. He believed that real change did not need applause, but people were still talking about him, not as an actor, but as a symbol of humility and grace. Inside a modest apartment in Brooklyn, Emily sat at her small kitchen table, staring at a letter that had just arrived in her mail. It was unlike any letter she had received before. It was hand-delivered by a man in a suit who said only one thing before walking away: "This is for your future." Her fingers trembled as she opened it. "Dear Emily, your kindness sparked something important. You reminded the world of a simple truth. Be kind, especially when it costs you nothing. I'd like to invite you to something that could change your life. Please come to the Metropolitan Hall tomorrow at 7 p.m. I'll be speaking there, not as an actor, but as a human. If you feel ready, I'd love for you to be there." Keanu placed the letter down slowly, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing: she had to go. That next evening, she stood outside Metropolitan Hall, wearing a borrowed dress and shoes too tight for comfort. She looked around the crowd. People of all ages had come. Some wore suits, others wore jeans, but they all had one thing in common: they were here for him. Inside the hall, the lights dimmed and a single spotlight hit the center stage. Keanu walked out alone. No music, no introduction. He wore the same black jacket from that night. "Simple, honest, thank you all for coming," he began, his voice soft but steady. He wasn't planning to speak publicly about what happened that night at the restaurant, but the world had other plans. Paused for a moment. The crowd silent. That moment was painful, yes, but it taught me something again. Something I already believed for a long time. Humility is not weakness. Kindness is not small. Told them about growing up without much money, about losing loved ones, about how pain had shaped him, but never owned him. Then he spoke of Emily without saying her name. A young woman showed kindness to a stranger, while others chose cruelty. That moment didn't make headlines right away, but it made a difference to me. Emily sat frozen, tears in her eyes. After the speech ended, the lights came back on and people clapped, not like they would for a celebrity, but for a man who had opened his heart. Keanu stepped off the stage and walked into the crowd. He made his way to Emily and smiled. "I'm glad you came." She nodded. "I'm glad I did too." But Keanu wasn't finished yet. In the following days, he made a surprise announcement through a foundation he quietly funded. He would be launching a new scholarship program called the Unseen Hands Fund. It would provide support for service workers, waiters, janitors, drivers, anyone whose kindness often went unnoticed. And the face of that program was Emily. News channels covered it. Headlines read: "Waitress who showed kindness to Keanu Reeves becomes voice for thousands." Millie began getting calls from schools, organizations, even talk shows. But she remained grounded, still working part-time, still treating every customer like a human being. While this wave of positivity was growing, something else was happening quietly inside the Holland mansion. Gregory Holland stood before a mirror, not adjusting his designer tie, but thinking for once about who he had become. He had not gone out in days, not to a club, not to a meeting. He had started volunteering at a shelter under a fake name. He wanted no cameras, just the experience of being useful. Washed dishes, served food, and listened to people who had stories far harder than his. For the first time, he realized how empty his world had been, filled with noise and pride, but not meaning. On rainy afternoon, he returned home soaked from the walk and found Alina waiting with a small box. He found this in the drawer, she said. handed it to him. Inside was the letter from Keanu, the one he had received. After the restaurant night, Gregory stared at it, the paper still smooth, the handwriting gentle. "You kept it, Alina Skides," he whispered. "I don't know why, but it makes me feel like there's still hope for me." Alina sat down beside him. "Maybe we should meet him, apologize, not for the public, for us." Gregory nodded. "Maybe we should." Meanwhile, Keanu was preparing for something unexpected. A dinner, not at a five-star hotel, but in a small community center in the Bronx. It was a thank you meal for all the service workers who had been nominated by people across the city. Stories of quiet heroes had poured in. Over 1,000. Emily helped organize the event, putting every detail together with care and love. She never thought her life would change like this, all because of one act of kindness. And the night of the dinner, Keanu stood near the entrance, greeting each guest personally as he helped an elderly janitor to his seat. He noticed something unusual at the back of the room. Two people stood hesitating near the door, a young man and a woman dressed in simple clothes, their eyes full of uncertainty. Keanu walked over slowly. "Hello, can I help you?" The man looked down, then met his eyes. "You probably don't want to see us, but I needed to come." Keanu studied his face, then nodded. "Gregory's, and this is my sister Alina. We wanted to say we're sorry, not for the cameras, not for the world, just for what we did to you." Keanu was quiet for a long moment, then he stepped aside. "Come in," he said. "Everyone deserves a seat." Siblings looked stunned. "Are you serious?" Alina whispered. Keanu smiled. "Forgiveness isn't weakness either, it's also a kind of kindness." They entered the room and sat at the end quietly, unsure but welcome. Dinner went on, full of laughter, stories, and gentle tears, but that quiet moment at the door said more than words ever could, because something had changed in all of them. Not just a man humiliated at dinner, not just a billionaire family embarrassed by their actions, not just a waitress who chose kindness, but a whole city watching and learning. That night, the lights in the small community hall glowed warm, the tables were full, the hearts full, and in the middle of it all was Keanu, not as a movie star, not as a hero, just as a man who reminded the world of something simple: treat people well, not because of who they are, but because of who you are. From whispers to waves after the community dinner, the city of New York seemed to breathe a little softer. Strangers smiled a little more often. People held the door open just a few seconds longer. Something quiet had shifted, and though no news camera could capture it, the people could feel it. KeanuReeves went back to his daily life, like he always did, walking the streets without bodyguards, riding the subway with his hands in his pockets and his eyes looking far away. But this time something followed him, not attention, not fame, but gratitude. In a rainy morning, while sitting at his favorite corner cafe, a young boy approached him. The boy looked no older than 10. His shoes were torn and his jacket too thin for the weather. He held a drawing in his small hands. "Are you the nice man from the TV?" the boy asked shyly. Keanu smiled gently. "Depends on what they said about meth." Boy held out the drawing. It showed a tall man with a beard holding an umbrella over a waitress while rain poured around them. In crayon letters, the top said, "Be kind like him." Keanu took the drawing slowly, his eyes softening. "What's your name?" "He is Skedgeson," the boy whispered. Keanu took out a pen and signed the corner of the picture. Then he kneeled down and said, "Thank you, Jason. This means more to me than you know." Jason's mother watched from a distance, her eyes full of emotion. She worked 2 jobs and rarely had time to take Jason anywhere, but he had begged her to come to this cafe just for a chance to meet the man who made kindness look strongly. While across the city, in a glass tower full of lawyers and executives, Gregory Holland sat in his office staring at a spreadsheet. He could barely focus, the numbers blurred together. His mind kept returning to the dinner, the warmth of the community center, the softness in Keanu's voice, the feeling of being seen without judgment. He closed his laptop and stood up. "I can't keep doing this," he said aloud to no one. "What do you mean?" his assistant asked, peeking into the room. "I mean this life, pretending every day the money makes it worth it." He paused, then added, "Cancel my meetings today. I need to go somewhere." And for the first time in years, Gregory walked out of the tower without a car, without a driver, just him and his thoughts. Made his way to a small downtown school that helped underprivileged children. He had heard about it from Emily, who now volunteered there twice a week, helping kids learn how to read and speak with confidence. Found her in a tiny classroom, surrounded by kids, all drawing pictures of someone they admired. When she saw him, she looked surprised, but not unkind. Gregory sat in the back quietly watching, then raised his hand. "Can I say something?" Emily nodded slowly. The children turned their curious eyes toward him. "He was someone who thought money made me better than people," he began, "and that night at the restaurant, I forgot what respect looked like. I forgot what it meant to treat someone like they mattered. But I'm trying to remember." Noah looked at the kids and said, "You're all important, not because of what you wear or what you have, but because you are human." And being human means being kind. A young girl raised her hand. Do you still have money? Some laughter followed. Gregory smiled. Yes, I do, but it doesn't mean much. Without a reason to use it wisely, I pulled out a folder and handed it to Emily. Inside was a donation to the school large enough to keep it running for 5 more years with new book supplies and free meals for all students. Looked up at him stunned. I don't know what to say. Just say it will help these kids, he replied softly. While this was happening, Emily had been growing into something more than just a face in a story. She had been invited to speak at events about service workers. She had even been approached to write a book about her journey. But she stayed grounded, always going back to the small cafe, where she had once served soup to a quiet man in a black jacket. Had started a journal where she wrote down every act of kindness she witnessed each day. Small things: a man giving his umbrella to an old woman, a boy tying his little sister's shoes, a teen helping a blind man cross the road. She called it the kindness log, and every page reminded her that the world still had hope. Keanu heard about it from one of her interviews and asked if she considered turning it into a public project, something schools and workplaces could use. She agreed, and together they launched an online platform where people could submit their own kindness logs. It became an instant success. Stories came in from across the globe, from India to Brazil to Kenya, tales of people helping people without reward or fame, just because it felt right. Soon kindness became a movement. People wore bracelets that said choose kind. Strangers paid for other people's groceries. Children held kindness days at school instead of competition days, and it all traced back to one simple moment: a bowl of soup and a quiet thank you. But not everyone was ready to change that. The background whispers of doubt still floated around in the elite circles. People who laughed behind closed doors, calling it a publicity stunt. People who said Keanu was doing all this for attention or to sell his next film. When Keanu heard about this, he didn't respond with anger. Instead, he arranged a quiet meeting in the very restaurant where it had all started. La Grande invited people from both worlds: billionaire families and service workers, actors and janitors, waiters and lawyers, all seated at the same tables. No labels, no titles, only names. When everyone arrived, he stood up and said, tonight we eat not as rich or poor, not as famous or forgotten. We eat as equals. Each table was given the same meal, a simple but delicious homemade dish. No gold decorations, no fancy names, just real food made with cream. Then something strange happened. The conversations flowed easily. People who had never spoken before found common ground. Laughter filled the space that once held judgment. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Gregory stood up and shared his story fully, not as a victim, not as a villain, but as a man who had learned to change. His voice cracked when he said, I hurt someone I didn't even know just because I thought I could. And that moment will stay with me for the rest of my life. The room stayed silent. Then someone started clapping, then another, and soon the whole room was filled with applause, not for his mistake, but for his honesty. After the dinner, Keanu walked out into the night with Emily beside him. Do you think the world's getting better? She asked. Looked up at the stars slowly, maybe not all at once, but moment by moment. Yes, and in that quiet New York street, something unspoken passed between them. A belief that no act of kindness ever dies. It lives in the hearts it touches, and in the changes it inspires. Asterisk, when hearts speak louder, the name Sodom had arrived. In New York, the leaves on the trees had turned golden, and the air held a quiet chill. But something deeper was changing too. It wasn't just the season, it was the people. The city felt different, warmer, not in temperature, but in spirit. What began as a moment of public humiliation had become a chain reaction of humanity, one that no one had expected, and yet everyone was now a part of. KeanuReeves sat on a park bench near Central Park, wearing his usual plain clothes, unnoticed by most people around him. He watched as children chased each other through leaves, their laughter mixing with the wind. Nearby, an old couple fed pigeons together. Beside him sat Emily. She had just finished a morning session at a school where she now taught a weekly kindness class, something she had created with Keanu's help, teaching kids not just how to be smart, but how to be gentle and brave. It still feels strange, she said, watching the children run, like all of this happened because of one dinner. Keanu looked at her and smiled. Sometimes the smallest ripple creates the biggest wave. A moment later, a young woman approached them nervously. She held a paper in her hand, her eyes full of tears. Seems sorry to bother you, she said, but I've been trying to find you for weeks. She looked at Emily. You changed my sister's life. Emily blinked. My eyes. My sister worked as a dishwasher at La Grande. She was there that night. She saw how you stood up. Even when you didn't raise your voice, it gave her courage. She was being mistreated by her boss for months. She quit the next day, and now she's studying to become a chef. She said your strength gave her strength. Emily covered her mouth, tears forming. Woman handed her the paper. It was a sketch, a drawing of Emily holding a spoon in one hand and a bouquet of sunflowers in the other. Behind her stood figures of people she had helped. "Unkindly thank you," the woman whispered, then walked away into the crowd. Keanu and Emily sat there in silence, but their hearts were full. Meanwhile, in the Holland mansion, the mood had changed permanently. Gone were the loud parties and show-off dinners. In their place were family nights, volunteering schedules, and open windows letting in real conversations. Gree had taken over a new project with a nonprofit focusing on building tiny homes for homeless veterans. He spent days in construction boots, carrying wood, painting walls, sweating beside men and women whose stories he never would have heard if he stayed in his old world. His sister Alina had started a podcast called Beyond the Surface, where she interviewed people from every walk of life: delivery drivers, teachers, immigrants, asking them what gave them strength during hard times. The show had gained a quiet but loyal following. Goni evening, Gregory sat in a small conference room facing his parents, who had flown back from a vacation in Europe. They looked confused at the worn-down office space, and Gregory's simple answer, "What is this?" his father asked, confused. "Where's your driver? Where's your staff? This is where I work now," Gregory said calmly. "And I don't need a driver." His mother scoffed. "We raised you for more than this. You raised me to believe people were beneath me," he said, not angrily, but firmly. "But I was wrong. And I think deep down you know that too." His father shifted uncomfortably. "We were just protecting ya from what Gregory asked, from being human." Through fell quiet across the city. Emily was preparing for the biggest speech of her life. She had been invited to speak at the International Kindness Summit, a gathering of people who led with compassion in business, education, medicine, and art. Stood behind the curtain, her heart pounding. Keanu stood beside her, his presence calm as always. "You don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "You already did," he said gently. "You did it the day you handed someone a warm bowl of soup without asking who they were." Nodded, stepped forward, and walked onto the stage. Lights were bright, but her voice was steady. "I am not famous," she began. "I am not powerful or rich. I am a waitress from a small town who made a simple choice to treat someone with respect." Paused, letting the words settle. "What I didn't know is that the person I served that night would become the reason so many others learn what kindness really means." Told them everything, not just about Keanu, but about the children in her class, the woman whose sister became a chef, the letters she now received every week from people who said her story gave them courage. "Kindness is not weakness," she said. "It is strength without noise. It is bravery without fists, and it is power without needing to be seen." When she finished, the applause felt endless. People stood not just to celebrate her, but because her words had stirred something inside them. Keanu met her backstage, his eyes a little wet. "That was the most powerful thing I've ever hardened. Yet I was just telling the truth," she said. Next day, the headlines were everywhere, but the most powerful one came from a student newspaper written by a 12-year-old boy. It read, "She didn't save the world, but she made it worth saving back." At La Grande, the owner of the restaurant had been watching all this unfold. With a quiet ache in his heart, he remembered the night all too well. He remembered how he let the Hollands act as they pleased, how he didn't stand up for Keanu or for Emily. Reached out to both of them privately and asked to meet. They agreed, and when they arrived, he stood outside the restaurant waiting with a new sign in his hands. He had changed the name of the Placide Kindness Table. "This place was built on money," he said, "but now I want it to run on meaning." Offered Emily a partnership to help design a special section of the menu inspired by everyday heroes. At pledge to donate 10% of all profits to the Kindness Log Foundation. Emily hesitated at first, but then agreed on one condition. She said, "The first dish on the menu will be soup, the one I served that night to the man who changed everything," he said, shaking her hand. As the restaurant reopened, the first guest to walk through the door wasn't a celebrity or a rich family. It was a homeless man named Jerry, who had been living under a bridge just a few blocks away. Emily saw him and walked over. "Welcome to the Kindness Table, Jerry. Would you like a warm meal?" His eyes filled with tears. "No one's called me by my name in weeks," he said. And so the table that once held arrogance and cruelty now served dignity and hope. Keanu visited quietly one evening and sat at the same corner table. This time the soup was warm, the room was filled with laughter, and the name of the man in the black jacket was not spoken with mockery, but with honor, because the truth had finally become clear. Kindness is not what you do when people are watching, it's who you are when no one is asterisk. The final seat at the table winner arrived quietly. That year, snow began to fall across New York, covering the streets in a soft white blanket. The city moved slower, cars drove carefully, people spoke more gently, and warm lights glowed from windows into the cold night. But the biggest change was not the season, it was the hearts of the people. The story of Keanu Reeves, Emily, Gregory, and the Kindness Table had touched millions across the world. Articles, had been written, documentaries were being filmed, and yet none of them could fully capture the quiet beauty of what had truly happened at night. Keanu sat at home in his simple apartment looking through letters he had received from people around the globe. Some were typed, some written in shaky handwriting, but all carried the same message: thank you for reminding us that kindness matters. Picked up one letter from a small village in Uganda. A teacher had written about how her students started a kindness corner in class where every child could leave kind notes for one another. Another was from a nurse in Argentina who said her hospital started each day by sharing one act of kindness. From the previous shift, Keanu sat in silence, reading each one, and smiled. These were not stories for cameras or awards. They were moments where humanity remembered itself at the same time. Emily had become a symbol of strength without power, someone who had risen not by shouting, but by staying true to her values. She continued to work at the kindness table part-time, while spending the rest of her week speaking at schools, writing her book, and leading the Kindness Law Foundation on evening as the city prepared for the holidays. She received a message from KeanuReeves. We meet at the table. One last time. When she arrived, he was already there at his usual corner seat, wearing the same black jacket, his hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Thank you for coming, he said softly. Away she replied. They talked about everything and nothing, about the way the world had changed and about the parts of it that hadn't yet. They laughed about the night that started it all, the soup, the stares, the silence that felt louder than thunder. Do you ever wish it didn't happen? Emily asked quietly. No, he said, not even for a moment. But you were humiliated, she said. In that moment I met you, he replied, and you met yourself, and we both saw the world not for what it pretends to be, but for what it truly can be. Not tears gathering in her eyes, reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. Inside was a bracelet made from dark wood and string engraved with a single word: Kindy. Had this made for you, he said. So even when the noise of the world gets loud, you remember who you really took it gently and slipped it onto her wrist. Thank you, she whispered. Keanu stood slowly. I'd have one more stop tonight. Where? She Escada smiled. The bridge where Jerry used to sleep. He doesn't live there anymore, but others still do, and I want them to know they're not forgotten. Stood up to. Then I'll go with you. Together they walked through the snow-covered streets, the world around them quiet and still. When they reached the bridge, they found two men and one woman huddled under worn blankets, their faces cold, their eyes to red. Keanu and Emily sat down beside them, opened a bag, and handed out sandwiches and warm tea. Just wanted to say you matter, Keanu said simply. The oldest man looked at them, his hands trembling. I don't even remember the last time someone said that to me. You don't have to be invisible, Emily added. Not anymore. They stayed there for hours, not as heroes, not as saviors, just as people sharing warmth under a frozen sky. That night, as they walked home, Emily turned to Keanu. Do you think the story is over? Smiled. No, I think it's just beginning. The next morning, news quietly spread across the city that a new wing was being added to the central library. It was being funded by an anonymous donor, but the name on the wing said it all: Kindness Table Reading Room. It was a space for anyone who needed a quiet place to rest, read, think, or just breathe. There were free books, free tea, and a large wooden table at the center with an inscription that read, all are welcome here. And on the wall nearby hung a framed picture. It showed a simple moment: a man in a black jacket receiving a bowl of soup from a waitress who smiled without knowing the world was watching. Gregory visited the room often, sometimes to read, sometimes just to sit. He had left the corporate world behind completely, now working with homeless youth, teaching them skills, helping them rebuild lives. His parents had changed not overnight, but slowly. They had started volunteering their time anonymously, visiting hospitals, reading to children, supporting small businesses run by immigrants. And though they still wore fancy coats and carried expensive bags, something deeper had shifted inside them. They now understood that true wealth came not from money, but from meaning. As months passed and the seasons changed again, the city continued its dance of noise and light, but under the surface, the kindness movement kept growing. A whisper that turned into a voice, then into a chorus. People began holding kindness gatherings across the world. Schools created kindness corners, parks had kindness benches, families told stories of gentle strength. At dinner tables, and in all of it, the name KeanuReeves was barely mentioned, not because he was forgotten, but because he had become something larger than a name. He had become an idea, a reminder that in a world full of sharp edges, kindness is a smooth stone. In your hand, Emily's book was finally published, its title simple and powerful: The Table That Changed Everything. It became a bestseller not because of fame, but because people were ready to believe again, ready to remember that kindness was not weakness, and that respect was not earned by power, but given by choice. In the final page of her book, she wrote, this world will not always reward you for kindness, But it will always need to be kind even when it's not returned be kind. Especially the only day years later, a little girl walked into the kindness reading room holding her mother's hand. She looked around wide-eyed and asked Mama, "Who started all this?" Her mother pointed to the photo on the wall. A man who was quiet, a woman who was kind, in a dinner that became a doorway. The little girl smiled, then sat at the table, opened a book, and began to read. The world quietly turned once more, not with noise or thunder, but with the gentle rhythm of kindness.